when you know what real violence can do, and when you know how much damage can be done by even a small thing, some of what you see on screen that passes for fight choreography almost looks obscene.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fandy Show.
Coming to you live from Aristocracy Island.
I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And today we are joined by the phenomenal Karen Lord, author of The Best of All Possible Worlds, Unraveling, Redemption in Indigo, The Galaxy Game, and the brand new wonder, the book of today's focus, The Blue Beautiful World. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I think it's been a while since you've been on our show, for the record.
Oh, it's been a good while. I think the last time, did we talk about the best of all possible worlds last time?
I think that was the one, yeah. So
that was a good shot. I remember that one.
I think we did all right. We get like 3 out of 10. You know, I don't know, maybe better. It's been a while, so it's very I'm glad to have you back. This is fantastic. And the second I said, and I'm going to embarrass Brandon, and I don't care. The second I said, we were talking like, oh, what's coming out this year? And I went, Karen Lord has a book, and Brandon squeed.
No.
I did. I mean, Karen knows this, but when we met at the Boca Slit Fest, I voraciously consumed both of the Cygnus Beta books as soon as I bought those copies, and it is still by far one of the only series that is strongly lodged in my brain and my heart. And now I'm very excited to talk about The Blue Beautiful World.
But thank you for being here. And Brandon, you want to let folks know about where they can send questions if they want to offer any thoughts?
A friendly reminder to everyone listening that we still want to hear from you. So please share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We have put together some listener mailbag episodes in the past, and we found out that those are actually really fun. We like talking to you about things that you talk to us about. So please let us know what your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and more are, so we can reply to you, so we can feel like we are all one big family instead of us just rambling to you like gods from on high, because we're not.
If you want me to do an episode where I make Brandon read Edgar Mittelholzer, I will.
No, I'll do it. I would. I have yet to read My Bones and My Flute, despite years of recommendation from Karen. I should solve this problem.
Just saying. I've read some Mittelholzer. Mittelholzer's good.
I'm still, regularly embarrassed that you have read more Caribbean sci-fi than I have.
To be fair, a PhD will do that for you.
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, I took a few Caribbean lit courses in my PhD, so I've read a lot. Okay, so first big question, which is the kind of obvious question. The Blue Beautiful World. What is this book? What's the deal?
Okay, so the easy and specific answer is it's a first contact book. Aliens meet humans on Earth, and, shenanigans ensue, as it were. But the broader answer is it's a work of sociological fiction, because whenever I'm looking at what interests me as a writer, it's never just the journey of one person. It's always the journey of a collective. It's always a case of how do pieces fit together. So sociological fiction, I was talking to an academic who gave me this epiphany. I was so grateful to him. And he basically described the work of C. Wright Mills, who wrote a book called The Sociological Imagination. And the idea there is you had these sort of nested circles where you have personal issues, personal concerns, public issues, and the historical context. And I was like, wait a minute, that's it, that's what I'm doing. And that may sound like a silly thing to say, but to be honest, we just write the books, okay? And somebody else has to help us market them, because those are two different skill sets. So it's been a while that I've been trying to I mean, it's very easy for me to say my work is Caribbean SF, because I can see the lineage, I can see the there's just something about the themes and the style and everything like that where I know that that's in my DNA. But not everybody has read Caribbean literature and Caribbean SF, so that's not always an easy marketing tool to lead with. And this description where I'm like, you're not getting a journey with like one hero, you're getting all this additional stuff that's happening within the family, within the community, within the government, and then also the historical, like, where do we come from, where are we going from this? That's all going to be embedded in there, and it does look like a lot. And sometimes what I do, so as not to like write door stoppers because that's not my style, is I purposely just give you like a taste of things as opposed to making everything like abundantly clear, like no details. And the reality is that's how we live our lives. We are none of us so completely in the know that we could say, yes, I'm definitely the protagonist of this particular novel. We're always trying to find out what the truth is. We're always trying to find out what the answers are. We're always trying to figure out how to go forward. We never have a whole lot of power. And my characters tend to be in the same boat. Even if you think they have particular skills, it's still a question of how those skills are applied. I hope that answered your question.
That raises more questions for me
yes.
to ask. So I keep saying that this book threw me for a loop. And so the big first question I wanted to talk about is kind of why it did. Because the very opening chapter, it's about Owen, and he's this mega pop star who does ethno-folk music, if I recall correctly, the subgenre, which I had to Google because I didn't know what that was. I thought it was very interesting. But the beginning of this, I was like, oh, so we're getting kind of like, maybe it's like Catherine Valente's space opera. We get lots of music stuff. And then it just like hit me in the face with this sort of geopolitical or almost galactic political thriller with lots of moving parts, lots of politics. And I don't mean like the big P annoying politics of like presidential elections, but like the implications of things like aliens interacting with human culture and like how do we react and what do we do and all of these moving parts. And so I think you've started to answer this question, and I wanted to definitely explore it a bit more, especially as the backdrop for much of your story is a world in a lot of disarray, because a lot of the stuff we're dealing with now has sort of come to fruition. And I wanted to kind of know what kind of drove you to explore these particular stories, or in this particular book about, alien contact, but then also all of these political elements that are kind of woven through, some of which I think we'll come back to.
You remember my background? I can't remember if we ever discussed it. If we discussed it, we discussed it a very long time ago. But basically, I come from a background of sociology, but also of diplomacy. And I was really having a bit of fun in that book, sort of describing what it's like to be an early or mid-career diplomat. And the weirdness that is trying to do things on a global level when you also have sovereign states who kind of want to do their own thing and look out for their own benefits and their own interests. So a lot of it was really just kind of me working out things that I've studied, working out things that I've looked at and been interested in. And it does sort of change focus in the sense that, I mean, when you said that the beginning kind of, it threw you for a loop, how it kind of is veered off into this, kind of geopolitical thriller. I kind of understand that because you start off with something that seems really, I don't quite want to say silly, but in a way it's silly. You start off with music. You start off with a bit of sports. The sports is actually a hangover from the Galaxy game. And some of the themes are actually also brought from the Galaxy game, because when I was writing the Galaxy game, I realized it was a bit too ambitious in my draft. I had to cut some things out. So I've been holding those things, waiting to expand them in the next book. And that's what this opportunity was. The thing is that the music and sports are actually part of my PhD. My PhD was on religious behavior in non-religious settings. And I looked at music students and sports science students and how they see what they do, what they study as something transcendent. And there are lots of like questionnaires on religiosity that are taken in the religious setting that are, given to church members and, people of faith and what have you. So I kind of took the existing things and then massaged them into this new question that would say, instead of how do you feel about your faith, let's say, how do you feel about your subject? How does this make you feel? And then you take the numbers and you crunch them with a lot of statistics that, still make you shiver to remember how I have these statistics I have to deal with. But then you see if there are correlations with the actual religious material. And there are strong and significant correlations. And it's like, whoa. Yeah. So that was something that came into the story as well, even though I wasn't consciously thinking of it. But how can we ever escape this? It's like that's where all the fuel is, that's where all the material is. And I saw you absolutely dancing with excitement. So I'm going to stop talking because I want to know what's going through your head right now.
I'm so glad you brought this up because there's also this same conversation about what we think of as the traditional like science fiction fandoms of the religiosity of fandom experience, which is exactly what you're talking about in terms of sports and music. In fact, arguably in music even more so because there's actual studies of boy bands currently of the euphoricness that it's mostly about young women feel when they go to these big groups and they actually are having almost like they're basically passing out because they're so overwhelmed with this experience they're having. And there's a phenomenon that people are studying now that has a lot of connections to religious euphoria that people have. It's obviously in a different context. So when you brought that up, my brain was like just alight with all of these things that I've been learning a little bit about. And it's super cool. And you're right that the beginning of this book, by making it about music and sports, it's like, it seems like it would be silly, but we kind of forget just how serious those things are in our culture and how much impact they really do have. And they're massive.
Yeah, because the thing that like immediately drew me to the story as well when I read the blurb and I was really intrigued by Owen as a character, in part because of the Galaxy game. And after reading it, I realized you are in fact right that it does share a lot of energy from the Galaxy game, and in particular, I'm so intrigued by the fact that both Owen in this book and Raffi in the Galaxy game are people in entertainment fields who are wrestling with the fact that they have so much clout in their field that it becomes political, and are wrestling with what their responsibilities are as a result, knowing also that this is also a lot of personal clout for them that they can also leverage, and wrestling with that as well. And I definitely wanted to ask you why that was in particular a narrative that you wanted to tell of the idea that there is obvious political power that can be leveraged through performance, and what it means to actually leverage that kind of political power.
So yes, let's talk about Raffi. So one of the reasons why this third book gives me so much satisfaction is that I think every book I write asks a question, and sometimes I don't fully answer it by the end. I just sort of lay out a lot of the issues and the problems and the twists and the turns, and I don't necessarily fully answer it. Sometimes it's because I myself, as a writer, am trying to figure out what the answers are. So we have to go back to the best of all possible worlds. When Raffi is growing up in a family where his father is being a very typical patriarch, and he has the power to be a very typical patriarch. He has the power to make his wife very docile, very obedient. He has the power to make his children fall in line. Not so much Raffi, but that's another thing. He even has the power to, if he decides that he wants to have a mistress on the side, he even has the power to try to make that happen. But of course, because it's Grace Delarue, she can push back against that a bit as well. So you have a child, a young man, who's come out of that kind of background environment and basically seen how such a huge power can be used in such a very petty and very damaging way. I mean, we have someone who basically was happy to just be on a remote homestead and just play mind games with his family, but had such a huge power that it took somebody like Fnac to really stop him from what he was doing. So Raffi's been struggling with this idea of power all the way through. By the time you get to the Galaxy game and he's at school at the Lyceum, it's very clear that he's probably even stronger than his father, and that he's feared. He's feared because it's like, we don't have the societal structure to put controls on you. We don't even realize the extent to which a lot of the, ordinary things that we do are kind of powers, but we're socialized into the acceptable use of those powers. So, you think of it as it's almost like if you have a boy that's raised by wolves, as opposed to socializing in the human setting, there's certain things you're going to be more concerned about because the checks and balances haven't been instilled from a very early age. So that's what Raffi comes up with. And as you know, Rafi in the Galaxy game makes a decision that, he's really not going to let the ham-fisted attempts of the Cygnus Beta government to kind of control him go on anymore. He's going to go into a society that does have the structure to teach him what he needs to do. And that's when he learns about the game some more, learns what his power means within the game, learns from a mentor who is a nexus, because that's really what he is, that ability to like pull people together in a network. And then learns that it even has a very mundane practical application, which is getting human consciousness to transit safely through dimensions at faster than light speeds across the galaxy. And that looks like a leap, but it's literally from, just controlling your own little family to spanning the galaxy, by the time you get to the Blue Beautiful World, I mean, we've always made it clear that Cygnus Beta feels such a strong kinship to Earth. Earth is basically, sort of the motherland, as it were. So even though Rafi, who is now Owen, is technically an alien, he does think of himself as someone who very much wants Earth to be in a good position, who has Earth's best interests at heart. But there's still all this question of this use of power. He's had a little stint as patron in with the Haneke family, and that hasn't really like got rid of the itch of I don't want to quite say wielding power, but he's been working on it, and it's still not quite enough. So then he allows himself to go into this really dangerous position where we're talking about people who don't have psionic abilities, and he's being able to literally command their worship. And that kind of thing kind of warps you. It warps you regardless. He knows that he means it for good intentions, but it's something that's going to warp him. So what's the answer to that? So the answer that I tried to give in the Blue Beautiful World is you got to have your friends, you got to have your family, you got to have the people who say to you, stop, you're being an idiot, stop, you're doing too much, stop, this is not you. Whatever the case may be, and you have to have more than one, you have to have a lot of them, and you have to give them that power over you. I said in another interview somewhere, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, that so too many stories that I see when you have that main protagonist, the protagonist has friends, but the friends are more like sidekicks or subordinates or somebody who's like, almost like peripheral to just support them on their arc. The people I've tried to surround Rafi Owen with are people who have their own lives, who have their own goals, who have their own ambitions, who he has given the power to say to him, no, I think you need to reconsider what you're doing here, because this is not right. This is not the best way to do it, and so forth. So the people I love in that are people like Noriko, who's like hyper competent and who is never in awe of him, and who he kind of protects that, he kind of makes sure that she just never feels that charisma from him. And then you have people like Peter Hendricks, who's like another father to him, but a completely different father mode, where it's like, yes, this is the way you can use power, even if it's not like a psionic power, you can still have the power of, technological genius and wealth and so on, and still use it in very important ways. So, your power doesn't have to be almost a magical sort of thing that nobody has. There are all kinds of ways that we can accumulate power, and it's still about the ethical use of that power, and it's still about having people who are willing to call you on your shit when you're getting out of hand. So yes, that all three books are dealing with this thing. What is the ethical use of power? How do you hold power? How do you accept that you have power that needs to be used, and use it in a way that's actually beneficial and doesn't harm people? And also acknowledges that, yes, we're going to steal from Marvel. With great power comes great responsibility. We don't have to like stay in our little homestead and just like, kind of manipulate our friends and family and say, right, that's me done. You really do have to think about, if I do have this, if this is something that is useful, how do I use it? But how do I also use it in a way that is not about enriching myself? It's not about getting myself all the attention and all the wealth and all the kickbacks.
Yeah. As Sean said, this is a book that is very much doing things in a mode that other books of its type would not. And I'm gonna let Sean definitely take some of the other politics questions, obviously. But the thing that I adore about this book and the entire Cygnus Beta trilogy is the fact that it's asking obviously political questions from the lenses that we would otherwise consider smaller than politics, in ways that reveal that they are intrinsically part of politics, and that our engagement with the kinds of power and influence that we have may seem small, but are acting on levels of our social space that is obviously attempting to actually progress the way that we communicate with each other and get things done. And I think that that's really rad. And I think that the fact that using sports and music as one of those elements reminds us that especially young people have a lot of power that they typically do not know that they have until they start using it. And that's really cool.
When you were talking, and I don't know if it was just like, kind of flashing back to conversations we had before, we come from the region that understands everything that you're talking about. We come from the region of calypso and cricket and how those things have been used. Yes, Brandon is moving with excitement now because he knows what I'm talking about. There have been studies.
Everyone listening to this podcast right now, if you haven't read The Mighty Slinger by Karen Lord and Tobias Pakel, you should do that immediately.
That's a good point. That's another, that, music protest songs and the political implications of that. My goodness, you see that? I need to talk to you more often because even when you're in the middle of writing a thing, you almost need to like step out of it and have somebody tell you, hey, are you aware you're doing this? Okay, yeah, I'm definitely on a particular theme here. So yes, calypso and cricket, I mean, there's too much history involved there. We don't have time to go into all that. I think, Sean, from your exposure in Caribbean literature, you will already have a good inkling of what we're talking about. But it's especially the tools of those who have little power to gain power. And I think that's very important because, half of our so-called democracy really is about making sure that everyone does get a voice, everyone does get a say. But that's the ideal. That's not always the reality. So apart from the whole, every 4 or 5 years we get to, exercise this one vote, yay, there really is a sense of what are the other ways in which we can influence our lives, our society, our governance, and so on. And yes, things like music, things like sports can be really incredibly influential for getting people to pull together, to feel connected, to feel a sense of identity, to go in the same direction.
And there's a long history of trying to suppress both of those expressions, yep. Not just in the Caribbean, lots of places, yeah. So like trying to stamp out Carnival would be an example. To be fair, Carnival also had like people with very explicitly anti-colonial messages, so I imagine colonial officials didn't like that very much.
That was supposed to be the point of Carnival, though, if they'd thought about it. Like the original, it's basically, goodness, the technical term for it I've forgotten. But it's basically the time when the common people get to mock the people who are over them, and the people who are the rulers understand that you stand back and you let people mock you for a day, and then they won't like bring up the guillotines later on. Give them that outlet. It's not going to hurt you. For one day, they get to just sort of talk about how silly you are and make you look really, really absolutely stupid. But then the next day, you're still ruling over them. So if you don't understand that, that's kind of like part and parcel about what some aspects of Carnival are about. I mean, there are other aspects, of course, too, sort of like Harvest Festival and the religious aspect of, Farewell to the Flesh. We don't understand all that, but the actual allowing for the mockery, allowing for that outlet. Yeah, that's not something you should be suppressing. You suppress that at your peril.
And they did.
To the literal physical peril of many, unfortunately.
But it gets to a lot of, I think, what you're getting at, which is, these small acts, as Brandon was raising, these seemingly small acts actually have very wide political implications in a culture, because they can be places where people who may not have a lot of power can exercise that power very strongly. Yep. Which is also, I suppose, why I shouldn't have been thrown for a loop when we got music at the beginning. I should have just expected what I was getting. But I don't know why. I went in just like, my brain didn't make the connection. So, that was pretty cool.
Really, the reason why you should have been surprised is it wasn't Calypso from the start.
That's a fair point.
It was global, so it couldn't be Calypso. It was global, so it had to be ethno-folk. Because the point is, he's connecting with everyone on their home ground, with their home acts in each country.
I thought that was really interesting that Owen's thing that he does at the very beginning, and was described explicitly, that he goes to a place and he hires a local musicians and he learns some song that's by some local, and he learns, a folk song that is unique to that region, and that's part of the concert he gives. And he does that for every single place. He's actually kind of a genius and scarily talented if he can do this effectively. Yet people are still surprised. Why is he so popular? Because there's all these questions like, how is he having why are his concerts so popular? Why does everybody love him so much? And I think part of the reason, and maybe you can talk about this, is because he's making those very personalized connections in all of these different spaces he goes to. He's not just doing Owen music. He's doing whatever he has, and then he's doing the things that are very deeply connected to wherever he happens to be playing at. And I don't know if that's what you kind of saw his musical role as, but that seemed to be the message I was getting.
I think you put your finger on it. The music, sad to say, is in fact secondary. The in-person connection is what he does. That's his thing. That's his huge talent. Because you will see from the beginning, from the first two books, that there's nothing that says that Raffi is at all musical, right? I wanted to make that quite clear. And I also wanted to make clear, even by the time you get to him as Owen, it's not that he's super talented either. But he's found a mode. He's found another. But again, he wasn't super talented at wall running either. He wasn't. He was actually, kind of, people would have had to help him a bit and so forth. And he was just like almost like amateur level, but he had that buzz. He had a little extra something. So that kind of level is what you see in his music again, where the music in a way is secondary. The thing is the in person, and this is actually from real life, because there are in fact musicians who people say of them, if you buy their records, you're like, but if you go to their concerts, you're a fan for life. You're a fan for life. You're like, no. This is somebody who I will fly to this other country and buy a ticket and see this concert again because. And I think that is something that is extremely special. I think something that's incredibly brilliant. We have become almost desensitized because the concept of recording audio has been with us for so many decades now that it's just we're almost like, that's just par for the course. But let's think back a bit before the phonograph, sorry. What's it? I can't remember. Before whatever it was, the big horn shaped thing. Before all of that, let's go back into the 19th century, the 18th century, and so on. People being on stage, people being in the theater, sort of like within sweating distance of the people who are singing or acting and so forth. And there's that buzz. I mean, I'll never forget. I always say the worst thing they do to us in school is they make us learn Shakespeare on the page. Sorry, the reaction I got just now was extremely gratifying. You can't learn Shakespeare on the page. You have to. Well, the first time I saw Shakespeare as a play, it was actually a televised stage production, which is still a little bit removed, but you can see the audience reacting, and that actually helps. But then when I actually was in an audience, we actually went to Stratford-on-Avon, and I and had a front seat for Othello. One of my colleagues got some stage blood splattered on him when Iago and Othello like cut their hands to make an oath or whatever. I probably said that wrong, but Othello was one of the people cutting his hand. And honestly, there is just this way of being in the presence of their sweat and their spit and the whole like the tension of the people watching as well. It's really just unmistakable. And that is what some people bring to their concerts, even if they're massive concerts. And it's the same thing you're talking about, the studies where, the girls who faint in the presence of boy bands and whatever, what they're really experiencing is not even so much just coming from the boy band, it's everyone around them, like just like making this thing more and more heightened. So yes, when Raffi comes into this as Owen, he knows he has more of an understanding of how to work this thing even than anybody else on earth. He understands how this kind of charisma works. He understands the modes by which it is applied, and he knows what he can do to get it to work for him. So that by the time you kind of leap from his concerts to him in with this bizarre, almost like UN type setting where he's like walking through portals, connecting diplomats in different countries. I hope I've given you enough by then that that moment no longer seems silly. That you're actually like, no, wait, he can actually do this. This actually is not just, it's not something that, you know, my suspension of disbelief can't handle. We've seen him do this and we understand the concept. And now the idea that he can just be like, as again, you know, be in the presence of someone where your breath is mingling and your hands are clasped and whatever, and then move on to the next person and make those connections and people like walk through the portals and embrace each other and talk to each other. Suddenly it's like, no, I see it, I get it. It's about not what he brings so much, but what he does in terms of connecting them with each other, and then they heighten it. They're the ones who become the powerful ones in the end.
I'm so glad you brought up the Shakespeare thing, because I feel like sometimes we've like lost the idea that so much of our literary arts are actually performed.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not as like full stage plays per se, but even like literature would be read out loud to people, or you know, you would at least have more interaction with either the creator or you know, a reading culture. And I really hope that if anyone teaches Shakespeare, I hope they're listening to what Karen's saying, because when I first, I hated Shakespeare in school, but I had to teach it once for an intro to lit class, because that was basically, your options were like Shakespeare or people that nobody had ever heard of. And I was like, I have to go with the one I can actually talk about. So I did Hamlet, and the big thing for me was like, I can't just like have them read it. So I basically gave them a massive amount of extra credit if a bunch of them put on a scene, they went and learned the lines and came in quote unquote costumes that they made themselves. I didn't think anyone was going to take me up on it, but they did. And they learned like a full 10-minute scene and put on a production where they got like Burger King hats for the king and the queen and like capes. And one guy was like in Ren Fair, so he was in full regalia, like everything.
He was like, this
he
is my
Hamlet,
moment.
Of course. Yes. And I think they got something more out of it by, like, they weren't great performers, but they really just tried. And I think they got a greater sense of that scene than if they had just, like, read it and been like, let me tell you about why this is about suicide or something. Like, no, this is, you're acting out his emotions and trying to interpret, like, what would this look like if he's performing this soliloquy. It was really great, and I think everybody should do it.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but stop teaching Romeo and Juliet, because everybody teaches that one. Stop it.
Oh, there are other reasons why they need to not teach that. But anyway, I wanted to say,
that's fair.
My school did make the effort to show us the films of the plays, like Marlon Brando for Julius Caesar and, you know, to Kill a Mockingbird and so on. But that's still not quite the same thing as seeing a theater production. It's helpful, it's useful, it's almost like the Cliff Notes version, but there is still something about the actual theater production that is very important. I do have to also admit that one of the reasons I became such a fan of Kenneth Branagh was when I first saw Henry V on screen film, and I saw it in the cinema, big screen, you know, like the old days, as it were. And the thing about it that impressed me, and this is where you kind of got to, like, you know, pick your material, is that in terms of the material of Henry V, you're not going to be able to get the same mud and blood and guts and glory on a stage as you are on a screen, right? And there was just this bit near the end where, you know, he's got this, actually I think Christian Bale, he's carrying, because Christian Bale was still like a wee kid then, he's carrying his body because he's one of the boys that got killed through the battlefield, and then, you know, they kind of do this whole like zoom out thing, and I'm just like, you know, and you're getting chills, you're like, okay, you can put Shakespeare on screen if you know how to make the right choices. So much of knowing what to screen and what to put in the theater and what's really good in text is all about making the right choices. Text is really excellent for getting in the head of someone, for example. There are ways in which you can really get into a person's philosophy and thoughts and whatever in a book that is never going to work on stage and it's never going to work on the screen. monologuing can go only so far. um,
True.
so, well, I'm so sorry. You had questions, and we're talking about like the whole sweep of literature here. So I am going to rein back a bit, and so we don't run out of time. But I think we're so much on the same page here in terms of how we see this, the in-personness of it, the presence of it, being in theater, being remembering our performance roots at all time. I do think it's really important.
So I want to take a slightly different direction then to bring us back to the book, because I had this really interesting question in the back of my mind as I was reading, because there were these sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle jabs at alien conspiracy theories littered throughout the book. And obviously they're intentional, like, because some of them, like, there was one at one point where you just said, like, oh, it's that racist theory about the pyramids could be made by any non-Euro people, which, yeah, but there were other ones, like, there was a moment where I was like, is Karen Lord referencing the reptilian theory here? Is that what's going on?
What's the reptilian theory? I'm not sure.
It's the one where,
God.
like, reptilian aliens are on Earth and they wear human skin in order to manipulate the governments of the world.
Right. Okay, hang on. I did not know it as the reptilian theory. Conspiracy. But I did, in fact, think to myself, there's something amazingly creepy, because I really did feel, okay, I've put this far enough in the future that there's got to be a way for people to be anonymous and then just going on the street. There's got to be a sort of a combined VR physical thing that allows you to have a different face. And even if there's not, we could just go with it because this is sci-fi. And then you get into the idea of we don't even want, this is the thing, we don't even want reptiles, we don't want lizards, we don't want that level of complete alienness. We want the horrible, uncanny valley of someone who looks almost human. That's what these masks are really meant to hide. That's why they work so well, because you're really looking at we know that a lot of how aliens have been portrayed in television is more about what can we put on a human actor that's not going to cost us a lot of money. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a real kind of, like the first time you begin to see a face that you're looking at and you're like, I have never seen that particular genetic variation before in my life. Whether it's a case of, something a little different in the spacing of the eyes, something a little different about the angle of the jaw. It's going to be something subtle, but it's going to be something where you just look at the person, you're like, I'm getting a weird feeling. I'm getting a really weird feeling. And the masks are almost like a part of that where, you don't even get to see it. You just know, what are they hiding? They have to hide. They have to hide because there's something I'm going to see that I'm going to know they're not from this planet. And the fact that they're hiding it is actually like amping up the tension. So it wasn't so much a reference to a particular conspiracy theory as it was a kind of let's see if we can, especially because Noriko, that's the bit where Noriko is really like, okay, I'm really grasping just how huge this is, and I'm really coming to terms with it because wow, and that because she is such a down-to-earth and pragmatic person who does not scare easily. It kind of had to be something of that level, and it had to be something almost that psychological to be able to get her to be just like, all right, I am actually going to face this head on. I'm going back to Owen. I'm going to deal with this because I can't close my eyes to what's happening.
And just briefly to that, one of the interesting things that I like about that and some of the other like narrative setups in this book is that at a point very early in the book, it just kind of very strongly generates this kind of spy thriller kind of energy. But one of the things that I think I appreciate about this book is it does that so well without being a level of intense that another book would necessarily be. Like for instance, at the concert, when the attack happens, the scene is not dedicated to, okay, there are threats in the area, we must take them out before more damage occurs. It's what's happening to Owen, and how do we diplomatically resolve this situation after we've checked on Owen and made sure that Owen is okay. That I actually really liked. That it was about the personal and the like kind of narrative political stakes of that scene rather than how do we get rid of enemies in that kind of sense, that I actually really dug the approach of and wanted to hear more about why you, not necessarily why you eschewed violence, but why you prioritized this kind of narrative lens.
Wow. Wow, you got me thinking now. I mean, now that you explain it, I see it. But you're just doing stuff, you're doing stuff that feels natural. Now you got me thinking. Okay, I'll be honest with you, deeply honest with you. Don't even know if I should be saying this. But violence bores me. Violence bores me. I know that there are people who when they're reading it and when they're watching on screen and whatever, they feel a level of excitement. I am deeply uninterested in violence. I've trained in martial arts, I trained as a soldier and whatever. And when you know what real violence can do, and when you know how much damage can be done by even a small thing, some of what you see on screen that passes for fight choreography almost looks obscene. It's deeply indulgent, and it's fake on a level that's almost harmfully incorrect. Harmfully incorrect is the word I would use. So I don't think it was like a conscious choice. But when you see me in a book, like not glorifying violence, it's not like a moral stance. It's genuinely I'm deeply bored by this, and if I'm going to give you a fight scene, it's going to be a very realistic one. It's going to be a very brutal one, and it will get the job done very fast. And we're not going to dwell on it. And you just sort of have to recognize things like how even a small blow can have long-term effects on someone's body, for example. So there's none of this, the hero getting punched up, 10,000 times and shot several times and skewered a bit more and keeps running. None of that's going to happen in any of my books, okay? It's just totally ridiculous. So, if somebody needs to die, if somebody needs to, be completely impaired, I will give a short, sharp. I mean, you've read Unraveling, right? Unraveling is the closest I've come to making violence look poetically beautiful. But I literally do that in the concept, in the context of a diseased mind. Okay. Where it is shown that there's almost a ritualistic aspect to it. I think that's why you get that particular approach for that scene where the violence is what kicked off things happening. But the stakes, as you say, were with Owen, were with how they could get it resolved quickly and without causing a huge blow up that was going to have serious problems later on in terms of media and politics and what have you. The stakes were identifying who was responsible, because that's what all that was leading up to as well. Yes, and I don't have a lot of time and pages to spend just unreeling a large and bloody violent scene when I know where my stakes are, and they're not with that.
It's almost, you could say that I'm thinking back to the work that I have read by you, that and when violence occurs, it seems like you're mostly interested in not so much the actual act of violence, but like, what is the result? Like, how does that really affect people? Even the threat of violence and how that affects people. Because I think you're right to some degree that like a lot of our media sort of, I don't want to use the word glorify because that doesn't feel, it feels wrong. It feels moralizing, but
it's almost violence for the sake of violence. And there's no actual reason or connection or whatever to.
It's sort of like the motivations for why someone would commit violence get sort of lost, and then the results of that violence, the very serious results, sort of also get lost. And so it's sort of like, we're gonna have the big fight scene, and then the result is he's just tired and he bleeds a little bit, and that's kind of the end. It's like, but he just got hit by a truck. I feel like there's more there. Like, maybe there's some PTSD at the very least. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I get hit by a truck and I survived that, I'm going to have problems.
Now, I do have to admit that I'm specifically speaking about a story that's in a more or less of a realist setting. I do have an appreciation for the stories and the screen treatments that are like, here is violence, and we're going to treat it like a ballet. We're going to treat it like choreography. There's a particular kind of, especially when you're working with swords and whatever, where it is more like a dance, where if you know anything about swords and fighting with real swords, you're kind of like, this is really just for you to enjoy visually, and it's not about anybody trying to kill each other. And that's fine. I like that. And there are ways you can do that, but then you've got to lean into it. You got to make it very clear where it's like, this isn't violence as much as it is a kind of a choreography, a kind of a stylized something that we can appreciate, because we know that we're putting this enough in the fantasy realm that this is where we are. We're not treating this with realism. We're treating this with a certain detachment, or we're looking at it in a more of a mythological or ritualistic kind of way.
Yeah, like if I got the pronunciation right, wuxia, with a type
yes.
of, yeah, which would be exactly that, right? In Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where they do fight, but they're fighting in a tree, and it sort of tells us a lot about the characters, actually, the way that they fight.
Yeah, it becomes a conversation of excellent. Listen, I'm sorry. Why did you start me on this? The Princess Bride.
Yes,
the Princess Bride.
Literally a conversation.
Fellow. I hate to die. Yes, but I no. The reason. Remember how I said before about the choices you make in terms of the media that you have to hand. You gotta give that author and screenwriter, which is the same person, props for knowing, because in the book, which I read first, the book, it is Inigo's internal monologue while fighting. They're not chatting, they're just fighting, but he's like, oh, this man in black is doing X, Y, Z. But of course that doesn't translate to screen, at least not in any way that we would find extremely boring. So they get into a conversation, but it was still with the same effect, So yeah, that's me on violence. Sorry, Brandon.
No, it's great. It's great.
In its right place, in its right context. This was not the place for violence to be saying anything. It was the place for understanding the stakes around the results of the violence.
So another question that I definitely wanted to ask, and I'm sure Sean actually has a lot of feelings about this as well. Back to the vein of the small kind of lower level political engagements that have large stakes in the world. Diplomacy plays a large part in this book, and in particular, the collective work of a lot of people who are not incredibly powerful, but are now suddenly given a lot of very significant role in attempting to accomplish a task in this space. Tiago, Kanoa, and I can't remember the other character's name now, all of a sudden.
Bay is one of them.
Right, Bay. Put in this, like, theoretical productive space where they're attempting to reason a lot of solutions to problems on the fly, while not knowing a great deal about each other or the things that they're trying to do, in this way that I thought was really engaging. I think Sean, in our notes, likens it to the Model UN, which I thought is a very apt comparison. And in particular, I kind of wanted to ask, I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about this because you've mentioned it already, why it was important to pick people who do have political understanding, but don't have, like, the clout of a prime minister or a president in this space, being put in a position where they now have to resolve these issues.
So, first of all, that whole setup that you saw, this mini UN setup, is basically me enjoying myself from the previous training that I have done. I did the Oxford Foreign Service program. Before that, I did a kind of a IT and diplomacy course, which was really an online course in Malta, where they had us for about 10 days in a sort of an intense seminar, getting to know you, whatever. And then we went back to our various countries and continued online. We had ICQ in those days. Can you imagine ICQ? This was like 1998. Anyway, so, goodness, I'm old. But anyway, so that what you see in the book is a very scaled down version of that. And I really do have to say that in a lot of situations, when you do get a course like that, you do tend to realize that every country sends one person, right? So even if you're in a course, I mean, not all courses will necessarily have a US representative or a British representative, whatever, because they are focusing on countries that they feel they want to support in terms of diplomatic training. So you will see like a lot of Eastern Europeans and a lot of Commonwealth, a lot of developing nations and so on and so forth. So that's more the spread you're going to get. But at the same time, every country is only going to send one person. So you're not going to have a class that's dominated by American viewpoints. You're not going to have a class that's dominated with British history. You're literally going to have a mix. And the mix can be, I mean, Kanoa is partly inspired by a Micronesian classmate of mine in the Oxford Foreign Service program. And one day we sat down and had a long chat, and he talked to me about how you sail the triangular sails, because he was very much into the whole canoe sailing and whatever. And his grandfather did this amazing trip to Japan, just using the stars and so forth. And I remember, I wish I remember where I put the papers. He even like sketched out to me, you know, what various settings of the sail were and so forth. And I was just like, I kind of scared of water, you know. I'm like, I'm not listening to this because I think I'll actually use it, but just the fascination of hearing him talk about it. So even when Kanoa, like, you know, looks at the boat and he's thinking about the design and so on and so forth, that's like a little nod to Larry. And so all of that to me is that's the flavor of what the world really is. That's the flavor of what the globe really is. Now, I understand. The reality is that if you are representing, you know, the US, you're representing a lot of people. So even just sending one person for so many people just seems horribly unbalanced when it's like, you know, one person coming from Barbados, there's like small town in the US type population. So I don't want to make it like glossed over too much, but there is a leveling, isn't there? There is a leveling. And that same leveling kind of happens when, just as you said, you're choosing a young person instead of like someone with the clout, right, the prime minister, because that person who's at that level of either diplomacy or politics or governance has been through the system and been molded by the system. Okay. They're not going to have the flexibility of mind to look at a completely fresh set of problems and say, whoa, let me think of how to do it. They're going to be very much in modes that they've been trained and had experience in from before. And I'm not saying it can't be done, because already I have Peter Hendricks, who in his 80s is clearly as flexible as mentally as any young person you can hope to run into. You know, he encountered aliens. He was like, yeah, I'm going to beat them with their own game, you know. So, you know, that definitely is not me saying anything about age, but there are people who do get established within their systems, learn how that system works down to a T, and don't want anything to change. So you're not going to be able to do a lot with those people. But if you have the younger people and they still have their connections, I think there's a line which I was sort of proud of, where it said, you know, they were basically working off of nepotism, because all of these young people still had connections in various places to people who did have that level of clout and power. And you know, you were saying, you know, one day we'll have a meritocracy, but today's not that day. You know, today is about getting the job done. And yes, we also chose you, in addition to all your other special qualities, we also chose you because you had connections to people in power, people who you could speak to on a personal level and say, hey, can you take this seriously? Because I've been part of this and I can tell you, and you know me, and you know how serious I am, and I'm telling you this is something we got to pay attention to.
So, last question that is related to this, because there's this brilliant little moment when Kanoa's talking. I think the line he says is like, we need to be an us instead of a bunch of different individuals, essentially. This idea of like a united Earth or united human culture or whatever we want to kind of call it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you were going back and sort of referencing that kind of age-old idea that you see in science fiction of like some external impetus has convinced us we must unite together, which even going back to something like The Day the Earth Stood Still, when we're definitely not united and the aliens tell us, yeah, figure your stuff out or we'll take care of it for you. Yeah, and I don't know if you were thinking about that idea of like, how do we actually do this and get to a point where we can have some sort of, like, the UN theoretically is supposed to start to get us there, but I think it'd be fair to say it's not there at this moment. But is that kind of part of the thinking process for this book, that you're sort of weaving the first contact and the alien narrative along with this idea of how do we begin that process of creating unity between human cultures?
So I like that you mentioned the UN because when you look at the origins of the UN and prior to that, the League of Nations, the whole concept was, can we please find a way to talk out our problems instead of killing each other? Because we are now at the point where our level of weaponry is such that it's definitely not fun for anyone anymore. One of the things that still like kind of gives me the chills is whenever I read the Guardian online, whenever not the TT Guardian, Brandon, I'm talking about the UK Guardian.
Yes.
Although I read that one too. But every so often there will be an article about some unexplodable War II mine, found at the bottom of a river somewhere in the UK or dug up in a field somewhere in France or what have you. And then I don't know if it was the Guardian, but somewhere I was reading about the area, the no man's land area where the fronts used to be and where the trenches were and so forth. And basically that there are just entire regions that are still no-go areas because the amount of chemical warfare that happened there, the amount of mines that were laid down, they're still incredibly dangerous to be in that actual location. And when I read that, it just kind of blew my mind because we've all got the image of the nuclear wasteland sort of firmly embedded in our heads, especially at a global level. But even just to think that stuff that happened before you were born, and this is going to go on at least for another 100 years or more, it's still having an effect. This is us already at the point where we're saying we have to find other ways to deal with this because it's not a case of somebody sacks and burns a city and it's in ruins and people just hop up somewhere else, and it's not really a lasting problem, if you see what I'm saying. Not in the way that semi-permanently contaminated land is, not in the way that unexploded mines are. So we're getting ourselves to that point already. And the whole concept of if we had an outside enemy we could pull together is a sad but true concept which has had lots of historical precedent, where we're always willing to compromise and join hands with people who we consider enemies if there's a bigger enemy out to get us. There are already people writing some cool stuff that I've seen where it's never a case of I'm in the middle of Kate Elliott's Unconquerable Sun. I'm in the middle of Purest Heaven, and that whole idea of why are you looking for this sort of binary? These are the good guys, these are the bad guys. Nah, real history doesn't operate like that. They're going to be shifting allegiances. They're going to be people who were very much like trying to kill you initially, who are going to be like, oh, no, we got to join together now because look at that. That's some danger to both of us. All that stuff is happening. So, theoretically it could happen. But what I want people to realize, and this was probably a bit of the conspiracy theory thing that you mentioned before, Sean, is that the whole reason why the planets of the galaxy decide to come to Earth and to lift the embargo is because they discover that the Zenuvians have already been there meddling about for at least two centuries. And that was them basically saying, oh, okay, we don't have a choice. Because the idea really was supposed to be leave them alone, let them develop at their own pace and so forth. I had a kind of a theory that basically said that Sadira or June basically was like the paternalistic planet for the Zenuvians. So the Zenuvians actually remember sort of big brother, big sister society, sort of like civilization sort of telling them, oh, you're very young and junior and we're going to guide you and so on. And there's a part of the Zenuvians that always felt, well, if there's ever someone junior to us, we get to fill that role now. But, the opposite happened where, first of all, Sadira had their own problems. But by then, they would have already been decided that, this whole thing was actually a mistake, because I've never gone into the details of the First Galactic War, but I always figured that it probably came as a result of that sort of paternalistic attitude going really badly wrong. So by that time, they're like, no, nobody's going to shepherd Earth in any kind of direction. We're going to basically do a hands-off thing, let them develop however they develop, and maybe they'll discover us on their own or whatever, but we're not going to be part of it. And then they discover that the Zenuvians and their eagerness to play Big Brother have already gone in. But because I've portrayed the Zenuvians as well, and there again, I never like stories that are ascribe one particular characteristic to an entire planet or an entire group of planets. So we're not talking about all the Zenuvians because there's the new A and there's the new B, and they've got different motives and motivations happening. And then that's the governments, and then the cartels are another thing altogether. So it's really the cartels that are out of hand, and the governments aren't strong enough to keep the cartels reined in. But the overall attitude is still, we want to play, we want to have a little sibling to boss around, and we're going to do that with Earth. And that is why they have to come in and interfere. That is why they have to break the embargo that was so important. That was supposed to, keep us untainted from all this external influence. So yeah, there are a few things I was playing with there. I don't simplify things, do I? This is why some readers don't like me.
This is fun. We want more of this. This is also why you should write like thicker books, but that's just me.
You listen, pay me more so I can take more time and then I can write thicker books. But as it stands right now, when you see the book that you have in your hand, that is me trying to write to deadline because I need to get paid by a certain time. Being honest. And while I'm here, solidarity to all the writers and actors strikes, because my goodness, come on, give us some respect for the creative work that we do. I feel extremely strongly about this. And anyone who thinks that this stuff that we do is easy, I just want to smack them, really.
Indeed.
I've done a lot of jobs in my life, okay? I've done a lot of occupations in my life. And this is not easy, okay? It is rewarding, but it's not easy.
I think it's very telling that you've been in the military and worked in diplomatic fields, and writing is the hard thing.
Writing is
People should hear you say that more often.
Yes. But it depends on how you want to write as well, because there is a range. And unfortunately, the particular kind of area of writing I've chosen is one where I'm not always catering to the reader. I'm really trying to sort of plumb some depths in myself. I'm trying to bring together a lot of what I've learned and what I've experienced. And I really am trying to serve the story instead of serving the reader. And I think some readers can detect that. And some are happy with it. Some are like, yeah, challenge us. Yeah, do stuff. And others are like, yeah, I'm confused. I'm going to close the book now. I'm like, it's okay. Go find yourself what you're happy with. But yeah.
The goal is that more of those people will put the book down and go, I need to figure out some things first, like do some preliminary reading and then come back to this, and then they come back to it.
Well,
that sometimes happens.
I would love for that to happen. And I don't know, Brandon, I don't know if you noticed, it's so hard to mention Twitter these days. I just don't even know what's happening with that place. But the Journal of West Indian Literature was they sometimes have a guest social media person who talks about a particular author, and they were talking about Erna Brodber past week or two. And I was like having a real zing moment. Sean, have you read Erna Brodber?
I have.
Have you read The Rainmaker's Mistake?
I have.
Yes.
It's been a long time though,
Okay,
but I have read it.
I just want to make sure you're on the same field. So Erna Brodber, for those of you listening who are not in the know, is extremely award-winning, very much revered kind of elder of our Caribbean literature sort of landscape. But also not what I would call like commercially popular, not like, it's not like she's very well known, but she comes from a very similar background, the sociology, folklore, and so on. We even, she's worked with SALISIS, Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies in Jamaica. I've worked with the one in Barbados. They're all part of the University of the West Indies. And there was something in the tweets that basically said that, sometimes she feels a little bothered that her children and grandchildren don't understand her books, but she likes that they feel it's rewarding to try with the challenge. And she wants that for people to not only feel that the challenge is rewarding, but be so excited by the challenge that you go and say to other people, here, come and read this, come and struggle with this, with like I did, and let's discuss it. That's the kind of experience that she's hoping to deliver. And I was like, that's this exactly. But of course, Erna Brodber's work is almost like front and center, obviously difficult. And I think that maybe my problem as a writer is that sometimes the things that I write on the surface look quite light, quite easy. And I can see that from the reviews. People are like, oh, she meant to do this and she didn't do it very well. I'm like, that was like the 5% of what I was doing there. So if you didn't think I didn't do that well, that's probably because you didn't see all the other stuff that was going on. So but I can't like force the difficulty because I still like the enjoyment of the light bits. I still like the enjoyment of I know my agent calls it the cozy intellectual, where on the one hand you're happy and you're enjoying yourself, and these characters are really cool, and here's a lovely romance. But then there's like all this really chewy stuff going on in terms of, you say, the politics and the ethics and the rest of it, and you're like, wow, when you go when you think, then you come back and you reread, and you're like, yeah. And then you go, when you think again. If I can deliver that experience, that is what I'm hoping for.
Mm-hmm. Also, I like that because cozy intellectual is very close to the way that I've recommended the Galaxy game to a friend, which is soft sociology.
Soft sociology.
So yes.
Oh dear.
I like that a lot.
Nice.
You should put that's a tagline you should use more often. One of those two you should just regularly quote.
There are two things I'm trying to push as I do all the promo for this year and then for next year with the next two books coming out. And that is sociological fiction and cozy intellectual. Those are the two things I'm really trying to push. But the cozy intellectual, it needs an aesthetic, and I'm still like on Pinterest trying to like pull together the images of like various like decor and clothes and food and whatever that I think matches this thing. You know how they have like light and dark academia? I figure if I can make it like almost like a brand, I'll be able to say to people, yeah, wear this stuff and you'll be a cozy intellectual. Mm-hmm. I'm kidding in case anybody wonders.
Soft gray sweaters and a rocking chair reading a textbook.
Stop. You see, this is where I ran into difficulty because we are in the tropics and me and sweaters are not going to have a cozy time.
Yeah, this is terrible for us, but we need to cater to white people as well.
No, we don't. It is originating in the tropics.
Don't have to.
Brandon, we had this discussion.
We have, yes, I know.
Cozy doesn't have to be about what temperature it is. I know that when people say cozy, they immediately think you're by a fire and there's a mug of hot cocoa in your hands and maybe some marshmallows toasted to the side and whatever. And that's what the whole cozy aesthetic is. We can be cozy in the tropics too. We can be cozy in 30 degrees Celsius. It's not like easy, but we can do it.
It's very hard.
It involves things like linen, for example, like linen and like, cold, refreshing drinks. Let me tell you, the mojito, I'm sure the mojito is in there with the cozy. Look, see, Sean is on board already.
I make mojitos myself with my own mint.
Oh, if we meet in person, Sean, I am going to beg you to make me mojito. I will find you the ingredients and the location, the kitchenette or bar, whatever you need, because that's like one of my most favorite things.
Mojitos are really good.
They're so good. Especially when you make them with the proper brown sugar when you're muddling it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. You see, this is a podcast full of segues, and I'm so sorry, guys.
Is it too
grand.
late to have a mojito at this point?
It's never too late. Wait, do you have work in the morning?
No.
Go right ahead. No one is stopping. You're an adult. You get to make these decisions on your own.
I am an adult.
I would recommend you make a Queen's Park swizzle instead, but I don't know if you have any swizzle sticks home.
I don't. No.
Exactly.
But maybe some other time.
Okay, so Sean, before we leave this, and we will leave this, I'm just going to say, you got the mojitos down pat, you're good. Get yourself some linen shirts, which are going to be great in this like heating world anyway. Get yourself some tree frog background noise sound thing. And I want you to sit and have your feet up in a nice recliner and the mojitos at your elbow and you're listening to the tree frogs. And that is your cozy intellectual space. You're allowed shorts and sandals too.
I love it.
There.
I want that.
Yes, this works for me. That's the image. I love it.
I do miss the frogs from Florida because when it's mating season, they're loud. Okay, so we do need to wrap up. So we've got two quick questions. One, which you've kind of already told us, but just in case there's anything else, what are you working on next? We know you've got the duology coming of Redemption to Indigo and Unraveling. which is coming out next year. Is that the primary thing, or is there another secret project you can tell us about?
Anything
Yes, I
new?
can tell you about something new. As you know, the same way you had the re-release and the new Cygnus Beta book this year and the two reissues next year. Think of this almost like a relaunching of my whole body of work, almost like a career relaunch. So now everything's under the Del Rey umbrella. So in terms of what I'm working on, I wrote a manuscript during the pandemic, so it's filled to the brim of trauma because we didn't just have a pandemic. We had a hurricane, we had ashfall, I had a friend die, I had there was just like a lot happening. And then there was a whole like Black Lives Matter happening in the background and stuff and stuff. And it was just trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And I was writing this story, which ironically was a part of what was supposed to have been in the best of all possible worlds, but I had to take out. What happened in the best of all possible worlds is I meant to set it in the present day. That was before 2016. And then by the time Brexit and Trump happened, I was like, the world has gone too crazy for me to even write about it fictionally. But I know how long publication takes. And right now, the things I thought I could write about, I made this sound as if it's the present day world, is going to be unrecognizable. So there were things I was thinking about doing, and I said I'm going to push back the whole era for the best for the Blue Beautiful World down about another 100 or 150 years or so, and I'll save this for another book. So I started writing this thing, and it's basically about civil war in the UK. It's actually, I was writing it because what happened was that somebody asked me if I was willing to write a novella, and I was like, I'm broke, so I'll write anything at this point. And yeah, you'll find me talking a lot about money. I am not ashamed. And so I was writing this thing, and I said to my agent at a certain point, I'm a little concerned because apart from the fact that it's a sort of a slightly in the future alt history thing, there's nothing in here that's speculative. Even the stuff that's going on could be blamed on this fellow's head injury, basically. She was like, keep writing it and see what the story needs, because my agent, she gets me. She's not like, you have to put into this genre. She'd be like, see what the story needs. So I did in fact finish a draft, and it took a while. I kept picking up, put it back down, because what would tend to happen is I would write something or be on the verge of writing something because you have an outline, you're planning it out, and then the thing I was supposed to write about, something similar, would happen in real life, and that was freaking me out a bit. So I was just like, kind of trying to pace myself in terms of my emotional reaction to a lot of what was happening that I was writing, but it was mirroring too much of my real emotional reactions to real things that were happening in the world. And but I finally got like near the end. Like I was saying to her, I just have this one last scene to do. It's actually the most pivotal one, it's the most brutal one, and so forth. And I can't write it just yet because Ashfall happened and it's too much like what I have to write. But here, have a look at it. So she had a look at it. And that's interesting because it means I don't think has she read the more up-to-date one? But she asked me to expand it into a novel. She had a strong reaction to it, a strong positive reaction to it, and she asked me to expand it into a novel. And I was like, I get where you're coming from, but I don't know if it's possible, because I knowing it was a novella, I did this thing where it was one single person's point of view and less than 24 hours. Now I can pad that thing with some description, but it's going to get much longer. I can maybe throw in about an extra, I mean, if I'm lucky, maybe an extra 10,000. I'm still going to be like a longish novella. We're going to have that conversation when I see her later this year. And that's probably what's going to come out next. And whether it will be taken up by a strongly SF imprint is the question, because as I said, it's not that strongly SF. It's really more about someone who comes into an area, and so it's really about refugees as well, about how you treat people who are fleeing war and disaster. And a curse is connected with that. It's called the angel at the gate, because I had this image of this stained glass angel with a sword guarding the gate of this priory. But at some point, the angel kind of comes alive. But like I said, maybe it's because of the head injury. so, so, so yeah, there was all that connected with it. And I even look, I'll give you an example when I talk about the stuff I was writing that was like freaking me out too much. around the time of Black Lives Matter, I was writing a bit where the protagonist is on a train trying to escape the front, which is coming closer and closer. And there are people on the train who recognize him as a foreigner and beat him up and throw him off the train because he's a person of color. And then Ukraine thing happened. And actually, at the point that Ukraine happened, so many other things had happened that I was like, I give up. I am no longer bothered by this. I don't care anymore. I've nearly got to the end. The firebombing of the Priory was covered with the ashfall where we had like, nighttime at noonday because of the atmosphere is so filled with ash. And I was like, yeah, I've gone beyond being scared. You have officially pushed me past terror to the point where I can finish this novel, this novella, and not worry about it anymore because, what more are you going to do to me? At least I know our protagonist doesn't die. So that was a ramble, but yeah, that's probably what's going to be coming out. I do have to return to it as soon as I lay down my promotional mantle, which is always a heavy one that authors have to, it can't juggle that creativity very well. At least I can't. I applaud those who can. But yeah, when I find a little oasis, I'm going to return to it and first see what I can do with expanding it without making it look like it's stretching out too much. And then give back to my agent and say, right, where the France are we going to pitch this? Because who's going to publish it? The angel at the gate.
There's
you
somebody.
Heard it first. Unless the title changes, because you know what things are like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but
folks,
I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, I want to see this. I also like, because I like any book where it's not quite clear what's real and what's not. That's always really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, break my mind.
Will do.
Like
always love that challenge.
Yeah.
So, of course, the internet is becoming very fractured lately, but, of course, the folks would want to know where they can find you in the world. So, how can folks get a hold of you?
I'm trying to be better about maintaining my website, karenlord.wordpress.com. I keep it simple. I need to be able to handle the stuff myself. And then Dr. Karen Lord, that's DR for Dr. Karen Lord, Lord, no E. Will find me most social media places. That's for Tumblr, for Blue Sky, for Twitter, for Instagram. Yeah, I think that covers where I am right now.
So, everybody should go buy the book.
Yes.
So, there we go. So, folks can go buy the book. They can get it right now. You can get it pretty much anywhere books are sold. So, go buy 15 copies and distribute them to your friends and then make them go buy 15 copies and do the same.
Have a book club.
Yeah.
Yes.
And have a book club and reach out to me and I may come chat with you. You never know.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, for coming on. I know this was really hard for you and you had no fun whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah.
I'm very excited to see a new book, and I'm very glad we could get you on the show. I really appreciate it.
And as I said before, you need to book me for next year, please, because I enjoy this a lot. And I don't know if Brandon is going to want to deal with it again, or if you're going to have somebody else. But I feel like I'm in good hands when I'm on this podcast.
I can twist Brandon's arm. It's fine.
Yeah, Sean forces me to do things all the time. But yes, I would absolutely love to chat with you again about all sorts of other things, including this new thing that you've just mentioned to us. But yes.
Absolutely. So for folks at home, thanks very much for being here. As a reminder, skiffingfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you've read the book and you want to let us know what you thought, you could do that. You can find Skiffing Fanty on pretty much all the social media sites. The best place to go for all of our stuff is our link tree, linktr.ee/skiffingfanty. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky and all of that, but they're all linked there in order of most importance. If you like the show, we do have a newsletter, skiffingfanty.com/newsletter, but we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/skiffingfanty, where you can give us all your money because we're poor and we need all your money too.
Yes, tell them about the money. Tell them about the money.
Yeah, give us all your money.
We need to live.
Yeah, mostly we just need to cover hosting fees. That's all.
That too.
Yeah. Anyway, for me, you can find me, if I'm not knocking headphones out of my ear because I got excited, you can find me at SeanDuke.net. I also have a link tree which has my Twitch stream and my Patreon, etc., and that's just /SeanDuke. So you can go find all of my cool stuff out there.
As for me, Brandon O'Brien, you can find me on most social media at The Rising Tides. I have a newsletter at brandonobrien.xyz, and I play TTRPGs at speculatorsf.com.
Absolutely. So, as required by the Skiffy and Fanny bylaws, I must make it awkward. So, I have one of those reclining chairs that you take, like, to the beach, you know? I'm gonna take that, go right downtown, Bemidji. I'm gonna sit right in the middle of the street with a Mai Tai, or a mojito, perhaps both, who knows? And I'm just gonna read a book.
Yeah, do it.
Probably not.
Do it.
I'm probably get arrested, actually, because I think that counts as an open container, so I don't want to get arrested.
Yes, not an open container.
It'll be a non-alcoholic mojito.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same.
I guess we could settle for that. It won't be the same though.
No, it's not. I'll just stay home. All right, folks. And on that note, awkward ending and scene. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.